Since I'm not mic'd, I'm just going to shout at you, so please forgive my shouting before I begin. I'm Brandon Reinches, one of the curators here at the Missoula Art Museum, and we're really pleased to welcome Molly Murphy Adams in conjunction with the School of Art at the University of Montana and Matrix Press. This is the Jim and Jane Dew Visiting Artist Lecture, and this has been a collaboration that MAM and the School of Art Matrix Press have undergone. This is the second artist in a series that's funded by the Warhol Foundation. We got a really big grant to bring in contemporary American Indian artists to give them more exposure, welcome them to our community, collect pieces, do exhibits like this. Ryan is another artist who's funded by the same Warhol grant, and we're really proud of that. And I'm very grateful to Jim Bailey for taking the leap of faith and kind of this cross-pollinating sort of programming where neither one of us really knew what we were getting, but we were both excited about the possibilities of bringing in a series of artists like Sarah Seastream and now Molly Murphy Adams to make prints that would culminate in an exhibition in 2018. So we're working on that very diligently and excited to see that artists of such quality and energy have graced our community. You all know Molly probably because she went to school here and got her BFA in 2004. She grew up in San Coulee here in Montana, and then ended up living in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where she, quote, divides her time 75% making art and 75% working, doing art appraisals, which sounds just about right. So I'm going to turn it over, but I just wanted to say thanks to the University of Montana Jim and Jane Dew Visiting Artist Lecture. Thanks to MCAT for filming this tonight. And we're really excited that you all chose to spend your evening here listening to the wonderful Molly Murphy Adams. Thanks.
Thank you all for being here tonight, and thank you for bearing with the initial technology. I was trying to go super in the present with the iPad and connection, but they don't always want to communicate with each other. So we're going old school with laptop and push-button cursor. So we'll just be actually giving signals to John. My name is Molly Murphy Adams, and from Montana, grew up in central Montana, and then later moved to western Montana when my mom came to go to school here, and moved all over the place, and eventually went to Hellgate High School and graduated from there in 1994, and started at the University of Montana first as a pre-med and a virology student. And I worked in a laboratory on campus in microbiology for 2.5 years under a grant, helping underprivileged and underrepresented students get into the sciences. The upside was that I absolutely loved the experience of working in a lab, and it really shaped my outlook from then out, and I love science, and I love that rational aspect. The downside was that I learned way too much about a career in the sciences and in the labs. And at the ripe age of 17, I decided that I didn't want to spend the rest of my life writing and applying for grants from the NIH or the CDC. And so in a fit of angst at 17 and a half, I quit college and decided to go out in the world and be a nanny. And I worked for a PI, and I traveled, and I made a lot of mistakes, and eventually decided I was ready to come back to college. And my initial plan was to, I swear I'm going somewhere with this, but my initial plan was to do just 1 year in the BFA program at the U of M, and then to transfer to MSU to do the architectural design program. And that was a great plan. I spent 2 years getting all my money and finances, financial aid, everything, and got back into school and was in school for 6 weeks, and I was pregnant with my daughter. And so that was a big surprise and a great big change of plans. I also found out none of my credits would transfer to MSU to do that architecture program. And I thought, well, I'm kind of enjoying the art program, so I think I'm just going to stick with it for a while until I formulate a longer-term plan. And I ended up falling in love with the art school and with the process, and found I was kind of good at it, and thought, well, I'm just going to keep riding this train until it stops. And it hasn't stopped yet, so I'm going to just keep going until the wheels fall off. So I finished my BFA in 2004. I had my daughter and did the program, really loved it. And I did my senior thesis work in beaded fiber art sculptural boxes. So My experience at the U of M was a process of learning concepts and skills, but at the beginning of my senior year, I really didn't know, none of it felt like it applied to me. I had a really bad imposter syndrome where I felt I was learning all of these techniques in media and history, and I really didn't know where I fit with that because my background wasn't reflected in anything I saw there. And I come from a very poor background, not a lot of education. Neither of my parents graduated from high school, and none of my older siblings graduated from high school. And so I had a really hard time identifying with some of the higher media that was represented. By my senior year, I decided I'd kind of figured out how to take all of the things that I was learning and to use that as the basis, but then to put it through the filter of where I came from and what I knew. And what I knew growing up was beadwork. And so I'm part native, and I grew up learning how to do beadwork, how to make powwow regalia, how to tan hides, how to sew, how to quilt, how to embroider. And so I started to take all those different ideas and to put them through that mesh. And what came out the other side were these sculptural beaded boxes at first. And then that started to evolve into other, sometimes crossing over into functional items, and then sometimes staying more abstract. So at the time when I graduated, my first show that was here at the MAM in this gallery was all of that three-dimensional sculptural work. And the piece that's up here on the screen was just realized the mic's just now kicking in. You guys can yell and wave if I'm not loud enough. I'm usually loud enough without any help, but okay. So this piece is a cradle board that I did in 2008, and the title of it was Past as Prologue, and it's a Salish-style cradle board. What was unusual about it is that each one of the circle elements for the flowers had a large bead that you could pick up. It would rotate 180 degrees, nest back in the beadwork, and it was a picture frame. And so there were 3 picture frames, so it would have the photos of the child's grandparents and parents embedded in the beadwork. And then it had several hidden brass folders that pulled out of secret compartments that would hold the documents that were related to the child. So it was a literal holder of the child, and then figuratively would hold the documents and the photos and the ephemera associated with the child. That piece won Best of Show at the Heard Museum Fair in Phoenix that year. So these first slides are just a representation of some of the earlier sculptural work that you guys might have seen here at the shows and that I'm more known for. This is a piece that was exhibited this year at the Oklahoma State University Museum of Art, and they did a really beautiful show. And this piece is an 8-sided sewing box called Enog Ite, and it's based on a creation myth of the mythological figure in Lakota history who brings beadwork to people. And she's a really dynamic female figure who is given 2 opposite faces, one hideous and one beautiful, as a punishment for her transgressions, her sexual transgressions. But it's very different from an Anglo version of what a sexual transgression would be. So I told the story in readable QR codes that are beaded onto wool onto 4 of the 8 sides, and then it has 2 different styles of beadwork design, geometric and florals, to represent the 2 different styles of beadwork that the Lakota people use. This next one was a piece that was featured in 2007 here in Missoula at the Word annual fundraiser and auction, and I was their highlight artist that year. And the title of this one was And Still They Come to Dig Bitterroot, and it's a scene of 3 generations of Salish women in traditional clothes digging bitterroot on what looks like it's just below Mount Jumbo. And it's based on a historic photo of Salish people coming to dig bitterroot on the campus grounds before campus was here. And the surrounding designs are taken from corn husk twine bags and hats from the Salish and Columbia Plateau people, mixed in with topo maps of Mount Jumbo and some of the surrounding areas. So those are some of the 3-dimensional sculptural pieces that I'm doing that are mostly fiber art. But my recent work has been transitioning to less maybe recognizable art that would be labeled native and more pure fiber art, and more of a process of taking the complex beadwork designs and breaking the pieces down into more basic geometric elements and kind of dividing them and rearranging them and playing with them with color. And most of the way I've been doing that is engaging with works on paper. So I've been transitioning from these purely sculptural fiber works to combination of beading directly on paper and doing a lot of mixed media work. Oh, but I forgot I'm not done with the sculptural pieces. This is a piece, oh no, okay, power cord. We'll pause for 1 second. One more technical difficulty. This is a sculptural box that I recently did. I'm moving to Tulsa, Oklahoma. I was also sort of grappling with this new environment and new landscape. And one of the amazing features there is all of the bird life and insect life and plant life that's different from the sort of a stark northern area. And there's these scissor-tail flycatchers that are this iconic bird there. And so this was a box that I did that has a semi-realistic version of those birds on the front. And then this is the box open with a Kiowa-styled interior. And if you go to the next one, then this is the back of the box with a geometric version, an abstract version of the bird on the back. And galleries get annoyed with me, though, with my interactive pieces because there's no good way to show people everything. I go, but I know, but it's really cool. You can open it and you can show them. And so they're afraid of it. They want to put it under vitrines and not let anyone touch it. So that some of my sculptural work now has interiors, exteriors, moving parts, and kind of a mesh between realistic, abstract, and bringing in some of the new designs that I'm seeing and working with in Oklahoma. This was a commission by the Sam Noble Museum at Oklahoma University, and it's a folding codex of 4 panels. And I'm starting to integrate some technology into the work, and I found a way to bead QR codes that are readable and scannable, so it's a literal embedding of text into the pieces. This was, the Sam Noble Museum is a crossover between art and science museum as well as an archive. And for this piece specifically, they wanted it to address biology. And so for this piece, we picked a series of species that are threatened or endangered in the greater area and in the region. And I depicted them realistically on the panels, and then the QR codes give the Latin and common names for the species that are threatened. And it is dual-sided with beadwork on both sides. And then the entire thing folds, ties, has covers, and is a codex, or a literal book with text in it. We'll go to that. I'm looking at it like it's going to happen if I don't tell you. But, the prints that we're doing this week with the matrix, this is the first series of etchings that I had this idea to start to combine printing directly with beadwork and to try to bead directly on paper, to try to integrate these two design aspects that I really loved. This was my first foray into it. It was a matched pair of dry point copper plate etchings with leaving intentional space to do beadwork, this striped beadwork that some may recognize from crow wedding robes or beaded hides that have these really dynamic parallel lines of beadwork that have negative space left in between them, with the colors of the beads linking vertically in the patterns. And so this was my first foray into it, and I really enjoyed it. And it was also a way to reach out to, in a two-dimensional media, to reach out and to be able to participate in other shows and to approach other disciplines through printmaking that might have been a little nervous about mixed media and fiber art. This is an installation work that this was the beginning format of it, was 16 pieces, and it was shown, I believe, 2 years ago at the UC Gallery in a 2-person show that I was in. And this was my effort at starting to break down the elements of beadwork designs in those really basic geometric elements and to simplify them into the most simple elements that I could, and to put each element individually on a square of paper, always using a directional axis in the middle. And so I'm beading directly on Bristol board and then mounting the panels on foam core and then mounting the foam core on these 4-inch birchwood panels. And then they get installed on the wall in a grid pattern. I'm a huge fan of Donald Judd and of the wall-mounted pieces and of the interplay with shadows from the dimensional pieces that come out from the wall. So if I can convince them right, if they light them properly, then you get the shapes on the paper, and then you get the shadows on the wood from the paper that floats out 1/4 of an inch, and then you get the shadows on the wall from the wood cube itself. We'll go to the next one. So because I'm OCD and I don't stop, this one I've expanded out to 100 panels at this point, and it's this. I think by this one they did an 8x8 was all they had room for, but so kept making more and more sort of along the same rules of taking these really simple single elements and extrapolating them and simply making it bigger and bigger and bigger so it becomes an installation work in its size, and working with the shadows and the different play of the elements. And there's no number to it and there's no system, so every time I install it, it's simply based on what looks or feels right or is fun at that time and how much space they have. So this is a really fun one, and it packs really nice and small. The only downside is galleries hate it when I put hundreds of holes in their walls. So they're not fond of that part. Oh, go ahead. This was another piece that I did that was pretty strongly influenced by Donald Judd and some of those wall pieces. This is a 9-panel piece that's currently on exhibit at the Maryhill Museum in Oregon. And it has 9 canvases that are all painted a deep blue. And then they have panels of striped beadwork on Bristol board. And each panel is exactly identical down to the exact number of beads and the exact number of stitches on each one. So they're an exact replica of each other. And then they're installed. This installation on the left is not my preference. I think they're too tight, but that's what the museum chose to do. The one on the right, where it's currently installed, is more the spacing I would want so that the shadows of the box, the dimension, comes forward and you can really see that with dramatic lighting. And I plan to do more in this series, but this originally was intended to be 3, and then I made 4, and then I made 5, and then it was 6, and 6 was kind of a nice round number. And then I laid it out and I was like, well, that would look really good tall. I'll make 9. And then I stopped. I have to stop because there's really no gallery that's going to let me make it 20 feet high. Unless you guys have space and you want me to go big. I could do the wall in there. So, yes, I would go as big as they'll let me. Go ahead. I started doing, so I was doing the printmaking with fiber art, and I was doing the fiber art on paper. And the next step that I've been working with is, now that I'm doing printing, and I'm incorporating some other media such as paint and pen and ink and embroidery. So I hadn't really done that. I like to add things just one tiny bit at a time. This was an early experimental piece I did that was incorporating gold gouache paint and embroidery and working with using thread really as a mark making tool, as a line, whereas beads are these like pixels. So I'm using thread more as a linear line making and using the paint to have different types of luminosity and color and transparency. So with beads on paper, I've got this glass pixel and this sheer white, but I wanted to start to bring in other elements. So this was an early experimental piece mounted on a wood panel, but with gold paint added to it. And this was another experimental piece that was a diptych of solid beadwork on paper, almost an experiment to see how much weight the paper would take and how much perforation it could take, and doing these landscape elements that were free form, so they weren't planned and they weren't necessarily designed, but starting to work with just shape and transparency and color. And I hope to do more of these. Every one of these ideas, I do one, and then it takes like 40 hours to do one. By the time I finish that one, I've been thinking the whole time I was working, so I tend to have another idea and start the next one. So I need to go back and work in multiples on all the ideas I've already had, but I only did one of because they take so long.
Is that like 4 inches as well?
Yeah, each panel on that is 4 inches by 4 inches, and I'd like to go bigger and more and go to infinity. The next evolution of this type was to use gold gouache, embroidery floss, and beadwork. And this is another, I really like working with this beaded hide robe motif where it's the parallel stripes. And in this one, I'm breaking it apart and doing part of the stripes in gold paint, and then also using these other hide painting designs of the large diamonds, and then bringing in the embroidery floss as more of the mark making on top of it, and then allowing the beadwork to be the color behind it. This piece is a little larger. It's about 18 by 22, and it's part of a traveling exhibit in Oklahoma called 24 Works on Paper. It's a curated exhibit done every 2 years, and they invite artists from all over the state to submit works on paper that they travel to some of the rural libraries, schools, but also the fine art galleries that participate. And so this one's, I don't know when I'll see it again. It'll be a long time. And my extension out of that single piece is to start to do more installation pieces that are in a grid format with lots of multiples. And all of these pieces are gold gouache with embroidery floss and beadwork on Bristol board. And what I've started to do here is, instead of using the panels, is to go to a less formal display method of using gold bulldog clips and tacks and putting it just directly on the wall. And the Bristol board is sturdy enough to allow me to do that without having to have any other really a matrix or a hanging system. So it's a less formal look to it. And this one will also be expanded into probably as many as they'll let me install at a show that will be coming up. And this one is taking a lot of the same beadwork and hide painting parfleche and corn husk bag designs, but then tweaking them with some elements that are more free-form and unplanned. And the way that I work with this one is just to, I take the gold and I work up an entire batch of pieces ahead of time, and then I just get thread and beads out and do it free-form without a plan. And so I work the gold elements and some of the basic elements up without a plan about how they're going to end, and then start working on them in batches and bits and pieces. And we'll go to the next one. And this is a side shot. The luminous quality of the gold, as you walk around it, tends to reflect and shine. It's fairly matte from the front, but at different angles with the lighting, it takes on a really metallic tone. And so this is a side and close-up view of the installation. And I'm doing a thing that all my professors in college said not to do, which was to have more than one slide in the same frame. But I suffer from an excess of enthusiasm, so I'm just using the collage method now to get them all into the same one. Another collaborative project I'm working on with a friend of mine who's a photographer is starting to bead directly onto photographs printed onto heavy cotton paper. So we're working on a project. We have about 5 done so far, where he's taking landscape photos in eastern and central Washington, and then I'm doing beadwork on them that represents the patterns in corn husk twined bags from the same region. So we're taking the landscape photos from a place, and then we're overlapping it with the actual designs from that place. But they're very stark, just using pure black beads and no other added design over his photos. And we're using both color photos and black and white photos. So we're working on a series that we're hoping to expand out to 20. We have, this was a prototype done with one of my family's beaded designs on a landscape, and then the rest of them are more linked to culture and place, linking them in the photos. And the corn husk bag designs are, because they're done in a rectangular format, they lend themselves to being transferred to this really well. And so far, it's been a really fun project. Technically challenging because the photos are printed on a matte surface, are very fragile, and so I have to work with a lot of padding. It's not as easygoing as an embroidery habit would be, so I have to be really careful and technical about the process so I don't damage the surface of it while I impale it 100 times. So the prints that we're doing this week at the Matrix, we're doing a little bit of everything. I came with 3 etching ideas and plates that were prepared, and a a screen print, and then we decided to go for broke and do some reduction block prints. Post-college, though, I fell in love with printmaking at the end of school, but after college, you don't have access to those wonderful facilities anymore, so you have to learn to make do with what you have. And without having a wet studio, the way I've adapted to still being able to do printmaking at home is to use inexpensive small rubber blocks and to carve them and use water and soy-based inks at home and do these, because I'm OCD and I like multiples, I'm doing the reduction block, a single block, multiple times on the same sheet of paper. And so this one up here is an 88. It's 8 by 11 configuration, and this one is a single 3-inch block, carved, printed 88 times in yellow, carved, printed 88 times in blue, carved, printed 88 times in black. So it's a multiple reduction print on a single sheet of paper. Mostly because I just like to up the ante and make a mistake just fatal for the whole project. So this is my answer to being able to work, to take really simple materials and really simple patterns, but through repetition and tenacity, make something complex with it. And so I'm able to do single monoprint complex pieces on my dining room table. And so this piece was a 3-run piece. It goes from a gold to light yellow fade in the middle and then back out to gold on the first run. And we're doing 2 sets of similar pieces at the Matrix event this week. So we have 2 rubber blocks that we're carving and that we're printing, and not quite this large, but smaller versions, half-size versions and third-size versions that we're doing. And if you go to the next one, John. This is a photo of it in process after the first run, so you can see that gold fade. And it's pretty humble materials. It's just, I think that's an old planter macrame piece of glass that I salvaged and is my rolling plate now. And pretty much materials that you can get at Michael's, and then one big beautiful sheet of expensive good paper, and death threats to my kids to stay out of it. And then so I can make these large pieces for print shows. And so we're working on a set, and I think I've only transposed it and printed the block upside down once this week. So we're doing pretty good so far. And we'll go to the last one. And this is a photo etching piece that I did. I actually used remnants of mistakes of pieces that I did while I was in college. And that mistake piece that didn't print properly, I cut into its component parts. And it's a portrait piece of, it's myself in the middle, my great-grandmother on the left, and her family on the right. And it was her family when she was away at boarding school one year. And so I took those photo etching portraits and then did beadwork on them in halos and gold accents, and then mounted it on canvas as a mixed media collage fiber art piece. So taking these leftovers and sort of junk pieces, but doing the halo and some of the color effects on them. And I think I roared through that out of sheer nervousness, out of having the computer collapse and run out of power. So that's the last slide I have. And I don't think I burned up enough time, did I? I came close to it, but I went too fast because I had too many slides.
Yeah, we can open it up for questions.
Yes, questions. Or if there's anything I roared through, we can go back with the back button and we can look at it again. Somebody must have questions if I went that fast. So. Sure.
This is a registration
I've got actually a question about this piece.
Okay.
Did you just do one of those?
I did one. I did one. I usually have about 4 single pieces of paper that are sort of my test at each color stage. So when I'm doing the next color, I'll test it and print it out. But I just do one. When you're doing this many repetitions, the rubber block doesn't tend to hold up well, much past about 100. After that, the edges will start to degrade. It's not a technically perfect piece. The rubber doesn't really print with really pristine edges. So it's not a technically difficult piece, and it's not a pristine piece in terms of the edges. It's just a lot of repetition builds a more dynamic design by the time you overwhelm somebody with 100 of something.
Are you pretty meticulous about gridding it out?
I am, yeah. I have small pencil lines and guides and marks that then can be removed at the end of it, erased, and those are the guides. And then the back of the block is Sharpie this way up and not this way. But it's mostly about just sort of getting a rhythm of the pressure, because the block is placed face down and then just gently hand pressed to get the right amount of pressure to release the ink onto the paper. So there's no rolling pin, there's no press, there's no mechanical part, it's just all your hand. So you have to find the right balance of coffee, beer, and just get it to where you've got all that nice, right there. Yes, Robert.
Molly, I'm struck by how cosmopolitan your sources are, particularly when it comes to tribal arts. And I remember you agonizing about this when you were a student.
Yeah, I agonized about a lot of stuff when I was a student.
I'm wondering how you come to such freedom. I mean, to
Well, I have a good and a hard story about that. My first piece on my first piece in the slideshow was the. I'll back up even a little bit. So deciding to take something that was, in quotes, a traditional art, and that was part of my cultural background. First of all, it was a little frightening to take that into the fine art world. It's a little vulnerable, and I was taught beadwork in a fairly traditional way, meaning, the first of your projects you give away as a gift. You do things with a good heart. If you are asked formally to make something for somebody for ceremony or for their child's first thing, you do it, and you do not accept payment. If somebody asks you, they ask you in a proper way with a gift. So that it had cultural rules and expectations with it. So to take it into a fine art space was nervous-making at first, and I was also taught never to make anything that was useless. And that was really hard for me to make things that didn't have a function. And Jackie Larson-Bread, who's in Great Falls and does beautiful pieces, her and I, she's a good friend of my mom's, and she kind of helped mentor me a little bit. And and she really told me that there's no wrong way to decide about that, about making something that has use or not. She herself chose to continue to make things that are functional, even though she knows that they'll never be used by the collectors. And so she really helped me with that first transition of, yes, you can make fine art with this. Yes, you can take this cultural thing and do this in this space and in this way, because she was doing it, and she was one of the few sort of examples I had. And yes, you can make something that's technically useless, or that's just to be appreciated. It doesn't have to be a functional item. That time period is over, and we can move forward. And the second part of it was feeling like I could only make pieces that were part of my own actual tribal heritage, or that maybe being, poor and coming from an uneducated background, maybe I didn't have the right to be inspired by Donald Judd. Maybe that's not my patrimony. And I got over that because I dig his shit and I like it. So, I just had to give myself permission to be both a native artist, but also an artist who gets to pick and choose from any tradition that I want. And then the next step after that was to say, well, I don't just appreciate Oglala beadwork, I also love plateau beadwork. And I love Ojibwe beadwork. And I also love rugs, and I love pottery. And in the process of becoming an artist who works in native themes, I also had to become someone who understands the native canon, which meant having to become an expert in that in a way that we wouldn't really expect someone to have to be, and it's led to a greater appreciation of it. The really negative experience I had that in a lot of respects set me free was the very first piece that I showed was a cradle board. I won Best of Show at the Herd, and which is a pretty big accomplishment. The only major native show that's bigger than that is Santa Fe. And, but in my background, I'm not tribally enrolled. My mother was given up for adoption and adopted off reservation. And when she went to go get re-enrolled later as an adult, they imposed a 3-year residency requirement. which if you've ever heard of Pine Ridge Reservation, is not probably somewhere you want to go and vacation for 3 years. And so there's no possibility for me to be enrolled in that tribe, in my tribe. And so most people don't know that the Department of the Interior actually governs what is sold as Native art as a product in the same way that they govern timber sales and natural gas permits. And so Native art is a product that is governed by the Department of the Interior. And if you are not an enrolled Native tribal member or an approved artisan, then you cannot legally sell, represent, or advertise your work as Native art. So I should probably back up. I am not a Native artist. I am an artist of Native descent. It's that very, very tiny technicality that keeps me from federal prison. Not joking. And $50,000 fines. So that year that the Heard Museum was comfortable with me participating in the Heard market and fair. I was respected. I was asked back every year. And then I won Best of Show. And I wasn't just in the crowd anymore. And the Heard Museum knew what my status was. I'd given them all my birth certificates. I had a statement from my grandmother, who's a tribal member. They were comfortable with that. But once I won, and once I won at the height of a recession, when a lot of other artists were struggling, there were some people who were very jealous, who were very upset, who didn't like the direction that Heard Fair was going. And I was turned in twice to the Department of the Interior. And I'm blacklisted from the Heard Museum. So I'm the only Best of Show winner that has never been invited back. So the upside of that, and it was a very strange experience afterwards to find out that people were talking about my mother and my grandmother like a breed of dogs. That they had no right marrying white men, that they should have made better choices about how they had their children, that they're breeding their qualities out. And finding out that people were talking about me in chat rooms like this and having board discussions was bizarre. And it taught me a lesson that if you ever let anybody else decide that you're not enough of something, you're giving a lot of power away. And I kind of decided, I was like, you can't blacklist me. I won't come back. I was like, what am I going to do? Win again? You know? So I was like, I won. You can't take that away. I don't have to come back. And I don't have to I can opt out of all of this. And I was already really starting to chafe at the environment of kind of being on display at those shows, of feeling like I had to tailor my work, that I couldn't do very modern work, eclectic work, that it had to be a certain look for the curators, that you have to constantly try to make prize-winning pieces instead of making related bodies of work. It wasn't where I wanted to be anymore. And so I basically said, yeah, I don't want to be a member of your club. Groucho Marx style, and was like, I'm out of here. But it was incredibly freeing after that because I could make anything I wanted. I could apply to any show I wanted. And a lot of galleries that didn't want to represent a Native artist were pretty happy to represent a fiber artist of Native descent. So by sort of turning the tables and taking that power away from them and giving it to myself, I freed myself up a lot. My work got better. My representation got better. And my work showed in more places and to a bigger audience. And I definitely, while it was a really difficult thing to face at that moment, it's been very freeing. And I've been asked to go get, just go get your artisan paperwork. You could probably go get it done. I'm like, I don't even want to at this point. And I found in Oklahoma that there's a real openness to, among other Native artists there, who understand the problem. And if they're happy to show my work, and if it doesn't take federal dollars, then I can be in the show, and I'm just very honest about the fact that I'm not enrolled, and I'm a descendant, and that's it. And if anyone doesn't like it or doesn't want to have the conversation, then I just move on. And I'm so busy that it certainly hasn't been a problem. So that's the really, really long answer to that question. And I wasn't sure if I was going to tell that story because it's a very negative story in some respects, and it's a really complex problem and a really complex issue, and there is no short answer to it. But I think it freed up my work a lot, and it cut the last of some of those constrictions. And also cut the idea that I had to try to fit in, that I always had to fly under the radar. And I don't need to fly under any radar right now, so. Any other questions? Did I cover them all in that monologue? Okay, Valerie.
So is it one bead at a time?
No,
So you
that is a method. That's called mosaic style. You can do it one bead at a time, and that's called mosaic style, and it creates a surface kind of like a French knot. And I have done that, and it will make you crazy, but it's a great effect sometimes. I do it on floral pieces and scattered effects and stuff. But for the most part, there's two main stitches. One is called lazy stitch or lane stitch, and it's just like a satin stitch in embroidery. You're filling a space, and maybe we should go back. We'll find a good example here. Back. Okay, so on this one, this is a lane stitch where there's 10 beads in each vertical row. And so they're a loop, like an embroidery stitch, like a loop like that. And there are other stitches that are more complicated that are called an applique stitch. They're actually a 2-needle method. In embroidery, that would be called couching. And that one's much more difficult, but that gives you a dense, solid surface. And actually, let's go back all the way to the first one. We're getting closer. Okay, that's it. Okay, so this one, you might be able to see the texture where there's these parallel lines, and that's a 2-needle stitch where the surface is completely covered, and you have a surface string of beads that are a continuous string, and then you have a second tacking thread that goes up and down, does not go through the beads, just goes over the thread, and it tacks every 2 or 3 or 4 beads, depending on the size of your beads and the conditions. And that's how you can get curvilinear lines, complex shapes, and different textures as you infill. And it's also pretty much bulletproof. It stands up. I mean, we don't have pieces that are really more than 100 years old at this point, but those pieces done in that method are just incredibly strong to real practical use. Lane stitch, not so much because they can snag and they do move with the fabric, but it's also incredibly slow because you end up having to work on a frame with a bottom needle and a top needle, and it's crazy. So the answer is not one bead, but it can be, but it usually isn't. Somewhere between 2 and 10. So on some of the pieces that we're doing this week for the matrix, there will be dry point etchings that have that style of beadwork added after the fact. And we have one example today that we can pass around after the question and answer.
You want to open that up, Jim, and just show? I'll turn the lights on. And we brought it up from downstairs.
Oh, it's very small.
Oh, there. Looking for him. We can actually pass this around if you guys want.
Don't lick it. Is that a problem? Does that ever seen on crow beaded hides, usually called wedding robes? And it would take a brain tanned hide, usually an elk hide, and there are these very long parallel rows of a lane of beadwork, and then separated by negative space, and then another lane of beadwork. And the color and the pattern is done in vertical elements. So on my pieces where you had a row and the pattern repeats over and over, that would be done on a 5-foot wide hide. So a row of beadwork, maybe an inch space, another row of beadwork. So there might be 25, 30 rows, and it's really one unit repeated like maybe 4 times lengthwise, and then repeated 25 times vertically. So it's so modern and stunning when you see one. I mean, for me, that's what native art, it's called historical and traditional, but when I look at beadwork, it is so graphic and really modern looking that I don't understand how it would ever look like old-fashioned, or maybe it does when you've got fringe and bells and stuff and everything else going on, and you're on horseback. But there's a quality to it that's so so graphic and so modern. And one of the reasons I love using it in printmaking is that graphic quality translates to printmaking, I think, really well. And
Is there specific symbolism with the pattern?
when it comes to beadwork, there can be symbolism, but it's really individual. And so to try to say that there's a specific symbol or not, there are sometimes, like in that etching that's being passed around, the etching portion has that series of the triangles along a center spine. And that's a turtle, a lizard spine design. And it's a really simple, so that's inspired by the geometric shapes on lizard markings and their bodies. So there's a lot of elements of a natural world that get abstracted and then put into the geometric designs. The geometric designs aren't just like, well, I had a thought and so I did a shape. It's always rooted in a natural element, a landscape, animal organs, their shapes, and so there's always some exterior element, and usually the element, it reflects some property about that exterior element. So if you have parfleche hide painting that has these real gentle curves, if you go to the landscape where that style comes from and you look at the landscape around it and you see this landscape with these incredibly gentle but stark horizon lines, you go, oh, okay. And also parfleches are always printed in books wrong because Anglo books are vertical. That's the format, and parfleches are meant to be seen in a landscape format. So whenever they put them in books, they're literally sideways. So you're viewing them the wrong way. I always want to take all the books and go, you have to turn them. And when you turn them, all those landscape elements suddenly pop. But they're not done just once. They're done and then repeated and then twisted, and there's always this repetition of really simple basic elements done over and over. And the repetition usually highlights importance. And so the more something is repeated, the more its intent is magnified. And lots of positive and negative space. Empty space is as meaningful as the design itself.
Hi, I'm lucky enough to have one cell, your piece.
Yeah.
That, it was done when you were at the UC. You had to show up.
Yes. Yeah, that was some of my science-inspired stuff.
I didn't get a chance to say hi.
And that's it. Did that have the black circle around it, or is it?
The cells go around the edge of the
Oh, yeah, yeah.
frame of the.
I did an entire science-based exhibit at one point.
That's what it said.
Yeah, and I did lots of single-celled organisms rendered in beadwork, and some of them, so there's a circle and then there's all black around it, so it's me looking at it through the microscope, and then there were some where the cells have flagellum, and I did periodic tables. I did all kinds of stuff for a while. I went on a whole science. I went on a science kick. I did Galileo's law of falling bodies in a box form. I was having a lot of fun.
Was it tuberculosis?
Yeah, I did a tuberculosis box too. I did a herpes box too, but I don't think the owner knows that that's. It's awful, but that one was just the gift that keeps on giving. It was just a small box with a lid, and it had what looks like kind of parfleche designs, but they're really test cells for the bottom of a dish, done in horrible, grotesque colors. Yeah. Yeah, I did that.
Oh, you should talk to her.
I don't know.
She did the stuff
Yeah.
from the lab.
The Rocky Mountain Way.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, my science background still shapes a lot of what I do, because I still close my eyes and I'm still doing plate cell counts in my sleep and still seeing it. So I'll probably never stop seeing that.
I wanted to jump in and mention that on Thursday, we've got some cards here. This is announcing a dinner with the artists. So if you like what you heard tonight and you're a member of the museum, you can have dinner with Molly. We're keeping that to a very small dinner, but it's kind of a nice, intimate occasion, and you're able to hear some of her ideas.
Again.
Repeated. So I'll leave these up here if you can grab them on your way out. But let's thank Molly for coming.